Hello and welcome, or welcome back, as the case may be, to the Atlantean Archive. Today, I'm joined by a special guest to talk about a subject and an author that I know many of you who watch this channel are interested in, and that is the great H.P. Lovecraft, master of macabre fiction. And to talk with us about that is Dr. Robert M. Price, who has been a long time Lovecraft fan, and from what I understand, you've edited some, maybe not, I don't know whether you've edited Lovecraft fiction in the past, or was it just kind of weird tale stuff, or Mythos, or how did that work?
Well, I just got done publishing a collection called Azathoth and Other Horrors, which is a big fat book containing all of the strictly mythos fiction of Lovecraft, with long and pedantic, windy critical notes by yours truly for the whole subject, and then a little mini essay for each and every story. And I actually did this over 20 years ago, but the publishers kept chickening out on me. And it was written for Chaosium, but they were a little afraid of the rights issue, which was sort of in contention and ill understood at the time. But now anybody and his brother are publishing Lovecraft. Then I have 4 more to come in the series that group the remainder of his material by theme. Like there's one on called The Madness Out of Time, which is all of his revision stories that are mythos related, because they form together a kind of alternate mythos for people that revision clients who wanted to bethought writers like Lovecraft, and so he sort of imitated himself, and they're a little more whimsical but a lot of fun. And then the third, go ahead. I'm sorry, you started to say something.
Oh, no, I was just saying that sounds good.
And the third one is, get a load of this, thaumaturgical prodigies in the New English Canaan. And all of these are book titles he mentions in stories but never used for a story. And this one is more traditional ghost and horror stories set in New England, the UK, and other places, but not Cthulhu stuff. Then there's Past the Gate of Deeper Slumber, which is obviously the dream world stories and the Dunsanian fiction, plus the Dream Quest of Unknown Death and the fungi from Yuggoth, and other revisions that he did for Robert Barlow and others in the same vein. And the fifth one is called The Book of Hidden Things, which is a bunch of marginalia, juvenilia, and original drafts by revision clients like Hazel Heald and Adolphe de Castro and Dwayne Reimel, the stuff he worked from, so you can compare him with what he actually did, possibly for the first time. And some other stuff like that. So they tend to get shorter as the volumes go by, but I wanted to be the first one to group them thematically and not just here's a hash of what I think are the best stories. And I put a lot of work into this, and finally it's coming out. And so, but I've also done for Chaosium and a couple of other publishers a series called the Cycle Horror Series, where on the one hand, there are stories. This really continues something Lynn Carter started long ago. The first one he did was called The Spawn of Cthulhu, which is possibly misnamed, but what he did was to take I think it was The Haunter of the Dark, and he included stories that influenced Lovecraft in this case, and other stories written since as sequels by other people. I thought that was a pretty neat idea. So I've done several of those: the Cthulhu cycle, the Hastur cycle, the Arkham cycle, the Dunwich cycle, the Exum cycle, and it's amazing how many of these rarities you can find, and how you can trace the evolution of these concepts. And same format, all the intros to the volume and to the individual stories. But then Lynn also started a series of collections of all the mythos fictions of particular authors. But again, only one ever was published in his lifetime: Mysteries of the Worm, Robert Bloch's mythos material. Well, there's plenty of other ones, so I put out the Book of Iod, the mythos fiction of Henry Kuttner, and Nameless Cults, the mythos fiction of Robert E. Howard, and so on down the line. And between the different publishers, I've had, I'd say, over 30 of these collections come out over the past 30 some years. And then I write the same sort of fiction myself, and that's come out in a couple of collections so far: Blasphemies and Revelations, and Horrors and Heresies, and with more planned. So I also used to do this thing called the Lovecraft Geek, where people would send questions and I'd try to answer them. Yeah. And I got through 120 or so issues of Crypt of Cthulhu between 1981 and a couple of years ago, usually 8 issues a year, like clockwork. And so I was really heavily involved in the whole Lovecraft thing, with an interesting and ironic denouement. I'm still doing it somewhat, but I was chosen to give the keynote address at one of the Necronomicons in Providence 6 or 7 years ago. And so I did. This was launched the whole event. But my topic was how Lovecraft foresaw the threat to Western rationalism by non-European superstition and irrationalism. I said, well, that's at the doors. It's happening just like HPL thought. And I was surprised to find that this was so politically incorrect that they banned me from ever speaking of the thing. and to make it even more hilarious, they gave me the Robert Bloch Lifetime Achievement in Lovecraft Studies or whatever, and kicked me out. I've always gotten a huge laugh out of that.
Gave you a parting gift and sent you packing.
Yeah. Well, they didn't know I was going to spoil the party when they decided it was my turn to get the prize. Okay. Hilarious.
Oh, yeah. Gosh. How did you get into Lovecraft then, and all things weird fiction? What started that for you?
I think I was in probably junior high when I started reading Poe, and I liked what I read. And then, a couple of years later, once I had really plunged into Robert E. Howard and just was reading like a fiend, Edgar Rice Burroughs, Lynn Carter, Doc Savage novels, I discovered Lovecraft in the Lancer paperback editions. And I was hooked there, and then started reading the rest of it in the Arkham House books, and then August Derleth and anybody related to it. And the more pious I got in my church involvements, the more I put that stuff on the shelf. But a few years later, I got back into it and was more enthused than ever. And I met S.T. Joshi and Peter Cannon and all these luminaries of Lovecraftianism, and became good friends with them. And it just became bigger and bigger, and it's been a great thing in my life. I don't regret a second of it, and I'm looking forward to more.
Yeah. Did you get any kind of, we were talking right before we came on the air, we have similar backgrounds in, strong religious backgrounds, and you can get some pushback for that sort of thing, specifically anything related to horror, maybe not so much science fiction, but did you experience anything like that? Any, the parents thinking, what's happening to my kid here is, I don't want him going in this direction or anything like that?
I don't think so. I'm sure the folks in my church, had they known more about it, not that I had to hide it or anything, I don't think they would have been unduly bothered, because I was reading so much else like Tolkien and stuff that they probably would have thought was wholesome, that just blended in. But I was very active in the church, and that's how they knew me. And so I guess anything else they weren't that interested in. So I never really got any flack from that quarter, though the church I attended was part of the Conservative Baptist Association, dispensationalists, fundamentalists, and all that. And eventually I began to think, is this maybe inimical to the spirituality I want? But I never really, I just lost interest in it because church stuff sort of crowded everything else out. I stopped reading superhero comics at the same time. Didn't think there was anything wrong with them, but I was just so into the Bible and witnessing and the whole shebang that for some few years went on the back burner.
Yeah. And I remember on one of your episodes of the Lovecraft Geek podcast, which I'll link to in the video description when this goes up, you mentioned that you were at some kind of event. I don't know whether it was exclusively a Lovecraft event or whatever it was, but they had this Church of Cthulhu or something like that there. And you gave this basically what amounted to a sermon, and people, to your surprise, you said, thought it was actually quite good, and were surprised that you were able to derive anything remotely spiritual from Lovecraft and that sort of thing.
It wasn't very hard. I understand the how strange it seems, but for instance, I was no longer Orthodox in any way, though I was a church pastor by this time. But we cooked up this idea of the Cthulhu prayer breakfast, and I would start out with some jokes and then do a kind of actual sermonette based on something from Lovecraft or Colin Wilson or whatever. The first one I did was based on the scene of in the Dunwich Horror, where Wizard Whately bursts into Osborne's general store and tells him that his grandson has been born and so forth. And I said, this is almost exactly like Nietzsche's madman scene from The Gay Science. And I said, what does this mean? And I explored the philosophy behind it then, because I still think Lovecraft and Nietzsche have a lot in common. Another time I talked about the mind parasites in Colin Wilson, and I said, well, as far as we know, these creatures don't exist, but this is a good metaphor for a lot of the things we allow to possess our minds, and we need to break free from them. And once I did something about Lovecraft's spirituality, which he, of course, didn't believe in any conventional religion. But I tried to show how what he does say about human nature and so forth is very Buddhist in a sense. And I tried to explain that. And I read some of the fungi sonnets where he certainly has a sense of transcendence. And I said, don't tell me this guy wasn't religious in a sense he might not have recognized. And I was really tickled when people would say, or another one I did was based on Arthur Macken's The White People, the idea of real sin. And one of the best things I think I ever wrote. And people would say, gee, I'd like a copy of that. And you could tell they'd never heard anything like this. If they'd heard sermons, they must have been purely conventional. And in the weird fiction element is probably mainly entertainment and imagination. And they hadn't really realized it could speak to your existential situation. So I've always tried to have a foot in both worlds. In fact, I've done Lovecraftian weddings at these events, and I tried to use associations from Lovecraft and Chambers and others without making it seem like a joke or a stunt wedding. I hate that kind of thing. So I tried to keep it serious, but with this mythology as the background. And once again, I had people asking me to do their weddings, Lovecraft fans. So I have. One last thing. The first time I went to one of the Lovecraft film festivals in Portland, the first night of it, as I was entering the theater where it was held, these two guys came up to me and they recognized me, I guess, from pictures, and they wanted me to autograph a couple of my books. And these guys were flaming gays. I mean, no question about it. They're really broadcasting it. And my immediate reaction was pastoral. I felt like a paternal sense that these are my parishioners. And I've always felt that way. And to me, it's hard to draw the line between Jekyll and Hyde here.
Right. Yeah, and I think I know some people, as we were talking about earlier, they can see some value in science fiction. I mean, Tolkien kind of went that direction with a fantasy, and then C.S. Lewis, of course, with his space trilogy and some of the comments he made about that. But I've tried to also point out that the horror genre, and even getting into things like Lovecraft and all, because these men, although they wrote, it was kind of a work for food thing at times, where they were trying to keep body and soul together, basically. I know Clark Ashton Smith wrote about his frustrations with that. But they were thinkers. They were deep thinkers. And they were educated, man. Lovecraft was very scientifically educated. Robert E. Howard poured all sorts of studies into the ancient peoples of the Britons and those areas. So he knew a lot about that. They poured a lot of thought into this. And even in the horror genre, I don't know what you think about it, it provokes us in a way, I think, to explore not only the dark side of nature, but you also get the heroic elements that come out in it. Man against increasingly greater types of threats. How do people react under stress? And of course, Lovecraft, I've joked with people, Lovecraft and Howard approached that, almost in a completely different way. I made an example one time where if you have a child, that's going to bed at night and Lovecraft is the dad and he's tucking them in and the child is like, is there a monster under the bed? And Lovecraft kind of has the character of yes, and there always has been. And your job is to lie very, very still and not wake it up, Whereas Howard, when he hears this, he's going for the Atlantean sword. He wants to split its skull.
Yeah.
So you get into all of that. And also, I think it speaks to something in us that so much of what we do, even in our institutions to the present day, is still driven by our biology, by survival mechanisms in us. And there's something in us that still wants to kind of act that sort of thing out and experience that vicariously. And fantasy and this sort of literature allows us to do that. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Oh yeah, I got into further big trouble with the first issue of another project of Lynn Carter's that I continued flashing swords with the different sword and sorcery tales, mainly new ones by several different authors, and the intro to the very first one was like I hate introductions where they say, "These stories are great. You're really going to like them." Oh, yeah, of course. But I thought, this isn't merely entertainment, and let me tell you why. And I said, we live in a time where masculinity is vilified as toxic masculinity and rape culture, and you wonder why men are namby-pamby. Well, what you owe it to your boys to get them to read Conan and John Carter of Mars and Tarzan, because these things are all about noble male virtue and courage. That's what they need a decent dose of. And oh boy, half the contributors to the book in protest withdrew their stories. And so I replaced them with better ones, but I was shocked. I got vilified on atheist and Lovecraftian message boards and so forth. Not that I cared, but I was just amazed. But I think that is very important in our culture, the way it is. Of course, it's less and less so now. Luckily, people are getting their heads on more straight. Well, and then on the other hand, with Lovecraft, as Fritz Leiber pointed out, I think it was he, Lovecraft was showing his idea of nihilism and cosmic futilitarianism. This is essentially religious because it's just what, I don't know that he ever even heard of Rudolf Otto, but Otto's classic, The Idea of the Holy, sort of did a phenomenological study of what is the religious experience, not just believing in a bunch of stories and so on, but what is the encounter? And he gives examples from throughout history and all different religions. And he said it's the experience of the numinous. And by that he meant you experience this ambivalent thing of the mysterium tremendum and the mysterium fascinans. You like Isaiah sees Adonai in the temple, and he says, "Woe is me, I am undone." Or Moses, he's afraid to look at God. Everybody would say, "Oh, I wouldn't miss the chance." Oh, maybe you would. Or Peter says to Jesus after a miracle, "Depart from me, oh Lord, I'm a sinful man." In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says to Krishna, "Show me your true divine form." He says, "Well, you can't see it with the eye of flesh, but I'll give you a supernatural eye." And then he sees this incomprehensible being, and he says, "My hair stands on end," and so on. And Otto said that is the religious experience, that there's ethics to it, and there may be doctrines that evolve from it, but this is the wholly other, and that is what puts you in your place and gives you the extent of the fear of God. You're not afraid God's going to swat you like a mosquito, but it's like, I am nothing compared to this. Well, what's Lovecraft saying? Look at the yawning abyss of the universe, and look at the short time human beings have existed. One day it will be just like the trilobites and the pterodactyls, and yet we can know that. It's very much like Psalm 8. When I consider the heavens, the work of thy hands, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, or the son of man that thou visitest him? That's it right there. And Lovecraft, though he wouldn't think of it as religious, that's the whole point of Lovecraft's cosmic horror. And it's profound, it's edifying.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think maybe that's an element. Lovecraft stories, they're always known for having a protagonist who typically almost goes insane, depending on what he's exposed to. There's this overwhelming cosmic horror. And I think, as you're talking about that maybe one of the reasons is because most of the people that are his protagonists are men of science. They're very much modern, methodological, naturalistic type thinkers, and then suddenly they're cast into this situation where they have no explanation. They're completely out of their ken with it, and they can't handle the leap from one to the other. Maybe they've lost that sense of the transcendent, and especially at that time, as we're coming off that age of exploration and all, when in the Gilded Age, that whole era, when people had such overwhelming confidence in technology, at least up until the First World War, dispelled a lot of that. it seems like his protagonists, they come from that world. They've lost that transcendence. They've had that almost arrogant trust in man's mind and what he can achieve, and that he's at the top of the food chain, and suddenly they're knocked all the way back down to the bottom, and it's a very unpleasant landing. I think maybe that's some of what's going on with Lovecraft there.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. And he said for that reason, the believer in the supernatural isn't really susceptible to the shock of horror. It's the person that's a naturalist, a rationalist, as he himself was, who was really disturbed. Oh my God, you mean there are gods of some kind? There are other beings out there? Our codes and ideas and beliefs are just phantoms? Like in the narrator of the Call of Cthulhu, I wish I still had this comfortable universe to live in, but that's over. And he kills himself even. But
it's kind of funny too, because it speaks again to the differences maybe in their fiction. But Robert E. Howard, in his Conan stories, especially when I'm thinking, of course, you've got Solomon Kane, who's a strong believer, and that's what's driving him to do battle with the forces of darkness. But I remember in, I think it's Queen of the Black Coast, where Belit is pressing Conan, tell me what you actually think about all this. And, he reveals that he does believe in the gods, but he says those who trust them too much are as ignorant as those who don't believe in them at all. So he's kind of in that middle ground, which Howard was, himself. He was a skeptic, from what I understand. And that maybe you can understand, too, why that sort of fires Conan to do the things he does, as opposed to what Lovecraft's protagonists do, because Conan's got that feeling when he entered the world, Crom gave him all he's going to get, and he's equipped him to do battle with nature, and what happens after that is up to him. But even though he doesn't have a relationship with that God, it's still almost kind of a divine mandate. The God has given him these abilities and sent him into the world, and he's to make something of himself, or he'll disgrace himself, more or less, I think.
It's sort of deistic. Like I couldn't stand the Schwarzenegger Conan movies, but one line I liked is when Conan prays and says, "Help me, Father Crom, but if you don't answer my prayer, to hell with you." That's a good Howardian thing. And he says to Belit, if there are gods, well, I would not tread on their shadow. I've always loved that too. So I'm not going to be a smart ass skeptic. And for that reason, when he becomes king of Aquilonia, he passes a decree of religious toleration. You can believe in Crom, Mitra, whatever. That's okay by me. Because, that fits skepticism. I don't pretend to know which one is true of any of them. Any belief has a shot at being correct, so, do it yourself. Come to your own conclusions.
And he doesn't want to take a chance on offending something, that could be very real from his adventures. When it gets into Lovecraft, there's so many people have impressions of him. We've talked about a little bit about that already. Maybe what he was up to and who he was as a person, and there's a lot of controversy over that too. What do you think are maybe some misconceptions about Lovecraft and his fiction? I noticed on one of the Lovecraft Geek podcasts, you mentioned that people have this image of Lovecraft that he was this retiring type of awkward figure, almost a recluse. Sort of like, what's the name of the poet? Her name is escaping me at the moment, who became a famous recluse, kind of peeking out of Emily Dickinson. There's peeking out at the world behind the blinds there. What do you think are some misconceptions that people have about him and his writing and what he was doing?
Well, that is one of them, because the guy traveled all over the place, and the longest thing he ever wrote was his travel log on Quebec. He went to New Orleans and palled around with E. Hoffman Price, and he would have, I'm sure, gone to other places if he could have afforded it, but he traveled around, and he was very convivial. When you read these collected memoirs by people that knew him, you get the impression this guy was more Christian than the Christians. He was unfailingly kind and sympathetic, partly because, well, you know how in one of the Psalms it says, "He knoweth our frame, that we are dust." It's like he can't expect too much out of it, so he's inclined to be merciful. Well, once Lovecraft was with some friends and they told him that some friend of theirs was caught in a burglary. And so this is sort of shocking, but Lovecraft just shrugged and said, "Well, what do you expect? Just another collection of molecules." And so he couldn't be too disappointed, and he was willing to give people a break. And he'd spend all kinds of time with people's revision work and coaching them, and he theoretically derived ethics from aesthetics. He thought, well, there is no heavenly bureau of weights and standards. There's no eternal law, but there is beauty in the world. And once as a kid, he was considering drowning himself because there was no point to anything. But he thought, no, think of all the fascinating stuff there is to discover and all the things to experience. Nah, I'm going to stick around. And because of that, he said, what is the beautiful life? It's getting along with other people and being someone who loves and is loved. And he was not this kind of weirdo. In fact, it's hard to see what anybody thinks he was so weird about him, except for what he wrote. But he knew the difference between fantasy and reality.
Yeah, I've noticed so many of those themes in his writing. And of course, it takes somebody who's got a head on his shoulders to delve into some of those themes to begin with, and to actually present situations in which people would lose their minds when encountering certain things. He understands the psychology of that. And it's interesting, too, that as a non-believer, one of his favorite words to use in his writing is blasphemous.
Yes.
That sort of thing. He's got some idea of something that's held as sacred, whether he thinks it's, substantial or it's just a concept of the mind or whatever. It offends us. I guess, it could be another word that you could use. It seems unnatural. So he delves into that, and his fiction doesn't seem to go this route. I noticed something about Clark Ashton Smith. And of course, they were very good friends and correspondents. A lot of Smith's work amounts to morality tales. And I don't know whether he deliberately did that. He was an intelligent enough man that I think he probably did, at least to some extent, or maybe he just sort of had a fascination with proverbs and that sort of teaching, that he thought, you can use a lot of these stories to demonstrate how stupid we can be and how we are led astray by things. And one of my favorite stories, don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it, it's one of my all-time favorite weird tales. I rank it up there with The White Ship by Lovecraft. Those two are just, for some reason, have always stood out to me. Very powerful image. And that is a morality tale, I guess, that Lovecraft wrote, now that I think about it. But that story, the end of the story, it ends with this man who's been rescued from this vampire Lamia type creature by a priest who has become his friend. And then once he gets safely away, he writes his story down. And then, he says, I'm going to return soon, and I do not think I will visit my friend Hilaire this time, the priest, so you know what he's going into. So many themes come out of that. And then Howard and his obsession with civilization versus the barbarian, and going back and forth with Lovecraft and their correspondence on that. What do you kind of make of these men, their conflicting personalities? Because I've wondered, as good of friends as they were, would Howard and Lovecraft have gotten along if they, had to live next door to each other, that kind of thing. But and just expanding it too beyond Lovecraft. What do you think was going on with these men at the time? And maybe, we know what some of their influences were, Poe and Dunsany and other guys like that. But who were they, maybe as in comparison to what we have today, and where would they think of where literature has come in the present time?
Well, I think they would think of a lot of it as effete and narcissistic and uh, weakness being glorified, and that this shows a kind of decadence that neither one of them would appreciate. Howard thought that civilization per se was decadent and would lead to corruption and so on, and that's why King Kull and Bran McMorn and Conan are all barbarians who are in contact with the civilization, and their barbarian background and orientation enables them to see it the way those immersed in it cannot. And so in a way they're less moral because they're bloodthirsty, though always for an understandable reason. But they can do what the civilized people do, only better, like being a king and be like religious tolerance and all the stuff. And Lovecraft sees so Howard has the noble savage, but Lovecraft seems to think that that's well, instead of the Picts, Lovecraft has the Nafkes and the Inutos and people like that, and Smith, the Vormies, and so on. They're like subhumans, and for Lovecraft and Smith, and they partake of the slime pit from which intelligent life arose, and so we can't totally escape it, and so we have to navigate our lives in relation to it, and not lapse back into it, which oddly civilization is actually liable to do. It loses the sense of the noble savage and nobility along with it. And so they have it's almost like, well, the tired image of the two sides of a coin. Because Lovecraft seemed to have some respect for Conan type characters, and whereas I think Bloch, for instance, did not. He once referred to Conan the Cluck, and whereas Lovecraft wouldn't have done that, and even has tips of the hat in The Shadow Out of Time. Peasley meets Crom Ya, a Sumerian chieftain. Obviously, it's supposed to be Conan. I wrote a story in which that's what happens. You find out what happened with Crom Ya, and or the cult of the yellow sign and all of that stuff. There's Bran and the Dark Man, and that's a reference to Howard. So he kind of gives a salute to them, just like Howard mentions Galgaroth and the von Junsten, the Unaussprechlichen Kulten. It's civilized, erudite people that discover all of this stuff and dig it up to their peril. So there's a kind of back and forth, it seems to me, between the nobility of the noble savage and the decadence of civilization. Both of them seem to anticipate the other, kind of a Tao, yin and yang thing.
I noticed that's really prevalent in Howard's. Well, it's in a number of his stories, but really prevalent as an example in The Tower of the Elephant. where, you know, Conan goes into this city where he sees all this decadence going on around him, and there's thieves everywhere. He sees all of this corruption. But in the very middle of the city, you've got this beautiful tower. And yet, even inside of it, even though it has treasures and all these items of beauty and everything, it's concealing these horrible secrets. So it's like Howard is portraying civilization in a way as outwardly as kind of the whitewashed tomb. You know, very beautiful on the outside, but inwardly full of corruption and death.
Right.
So it goes into that. Now, with all of your experience in Lovecraft fandom and dealing with people who are, and even beyond Lovecraft and the weird tales community and that sort of thing, what do you think people value these stories for these days, or what elements have they talked about to you beyond the, you know, the adventure and the strange creatures and that sort of thing? Do you think, what's the lasting appeal of these kinds of stories with that?
I think they're, like with Lovecraft, it's a kind of a thought experiment. You're for the temporary willing suspension of disbelief. It does put a chill up and down your spine. I suppose something like this were true, or maybe you wish it were true because you want to escape the mundane. Like Tolkien said when people said, "Why are you wasting your time with fantasy?" And he said, "Well, I don't see that there's anything wrong with a guy in a prison cell thinking about life outside of the prison, and that's what's going on." And again, with I think Vladimir Propp and others said, studying the fairy tale, that basically all of these quest stories are scripts to inspire young men to achieve their goal, especially finding a mate. The evil wizard or the old witch or whatever that Galahad or Siegfried or whatever is battling against is really his future father-in-law. He has to prove his worth and so forth. And Joseph Campbell broadens that out and says, really, it's whatever your bliss is, whatever your, I would say whatever your dharma is. It's not going to be easy to tread that path, but that you must in order to find fulfillment, or you're wasting your life. And I think these stories about Conan are at the bottom the same sort of thing. And with Lovecraft, I guess it's trying to create a sense of wonder. I don't think he's trying to make people despair, even though he puts it that way, because that's the most effective way to show the impact of shocking, unsuspected knowledge. But he makes you wonder, well, what is the ultimate truth? What is going on? Like at the beginning of the Call of Cthulhu, so far the revelations of science haven't harmed us much, but we haven't gone very far. The farther we go and the more revelations science brings us may force us back into a new dark age of superstition, to gather around the campfire because we don't know what's out there. And so there's a kind of urge toward courage, an intellectual courage in Lovecraft, because he dared to see through conventional religion and didn't seem to hurt him. And he did a thing in one of his letters, why religion survives, and he had about 10 different arguments or reasons, and it was all like to comfort yourself and tell yourself there's nothing to be afraid of. Well, you have to have the courage to see that there is, and to, as that Conan comes in here, you got to try to fight them, because even if they kill you, you've won in one sense. You've done your life has been fulfilled in the courage and nobility, which is why we venerate martyrs and victors and so on.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And where do you see, because we start off with, and there have always been strange stories and stories of the macabre and the campfire tale and all that sort of thing. And you get Mary Shelley comes along and gives us the first real modern science fiction work with Frankenstein. the works of the late 19th century, then going into the Weird Tales era and kind of the golden age in the 50s and that time. And it seems like with so many changes in society, I'm wondering, what kind of new mythology is out there to be built at this point? I mean, these guys like Howard and Lovecraft and Smith, they created their own worlds, their own vocabularies. Of course, Burroughs and others did the same sorts of things. Where do you see this going at some point? Is it kind of like society? Because I feel like at this point, and it's just a societal observation, cultural observation, that we're falling dangerously close to this nihilism, this Nietzschean despair almost as a culture. And I think it can't last. I think it has to snap back. I expect a revival more of that type of fiction, simply because people have to feel the ground underneath their feet again. They don't know where they're at or what they're doing these days, or where they're permitted to walk. Where do you see it going?
Well, I kind of think that in Dune, when they had the Butlerian Jihad and destroyed all the computers because they could see it heading toward, like in the Terminator, where the machines, or the Matrix, where they rule, and they said, we got to stop this. Now, we don't want to return to pre-technological barbarism, so maybe we can heighten human intelligence, and they create the mentats with the aid of the spice that makes people have a computer-like brain, and or folding space instead of spaceships and all that. That's a dream, but you think of AI. That seems very disturbing to me, and it's well portrayed in the Avengers movie, The Age of Ultron. You're trying to save humanity, but watch out! That's not going to take much to flip that switch the wrong way, and suddenly the machines figure they can get along pretty well without us. And so I worry about that a little bit. It seems to me you may have a dystopian future, but things are going real well at the moment. It's just that this cloud hovers over things. We can't allow our enemies to develop this and opt out of the game, or we'll really be in trouble. So we have to take the risk of following that path too, and I hope it's not to our enslavement or destruction, but nothing would surprise me.
Yeah, it's a big concern, I know, for a lot of people, and that's the idea that living the sentient machines has been such a big influence in science fiction over the years. Star Trek has come back to it multiple times, episodes like The Ultimate Computer and that sort of thing. And of course, you've got so many people who want to take it in so many different directions. You've got the people who want to merge with the machines, and then you got the other people who want to stay completely away from it. And then you've got that, that copious middle ground in there that we have to try to find some kind of solution for. But I expect maybe more themes along those lines. And I think fiction, theater, movies, books, all these kinds of things, they don't just reflect society, but, as I'm sure you have seen as well, they influence it heavily. And I think people do a lot of their thinking out loud in fiction. We kind of think at each other, even when we can't talk directly. Rod Serling, of course, did that with The Twilight Zone. There were issues he couldn't touch on primetime TV, in their normal setting, but put it on a planet somewhere on the other side of the galaxy with strange looking things or whatever, you can tell a story that resonates. So I expect to see kind of a return of that.
Well, think of these prophetic novels like 1984. That's like, I have a T-shirt my wife got me that says "Make 1984 Fiction Again," and because he saw what would happen. Or Jean Raspail's The Camp of the Saints. That was written in the late 60s or early 70s. He saw just what would happen if the third world packed up and came to the West and said, okay, it's our time to get the goodies, and you're going to have to make room for us. It's like he saw it with clairvoyance. He could just see what would happen. And there are, it reminds me of a nonfiction book by Andrea Malrich, Will the Soviet Union Survive Until 1984, written in the 70s. Well, this wasn't fiction, but it was the same sort of thing. The guy could, sort of like Harry Seldon in the Foundation books, he could just see what was going to happen. Not in any supernatural way, but he followed certain trends and could see, oh boy, I know where this is leading. And that's, I think that's the kind of prophetic fiction we'll have. Or Brave New World, where everybody is tranquilized and entertained into a stupor culturally. We're way down that road too, more than one of these disastrous things. But I did one story. What the heck was it even called? But it's set in a future time, and it's kind of cagey, describing people in their workplace and so forth. And there's this guy over here is whispering about the old ones. And somehow toward the end of the story, he finds this elevator shaft that will take him down to where the old ones live. And he's shocked because these are beings of flesh, not robots like himself, which everybody else is. And I thought, well, maybe this is going to happen. We get to be androids or whatever. I should send you a couple of things I wrote. One was the first Lovecraft article I ever wrote, called Lovecraft's Concept of Blasphemy. And another one was, what is it? Cosmic Fear and the Fear of the Lord, Lovecraft's Religious Vision. I think you might get a kick out of them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I appreciate that. What are your favorite Lovecraft stories then?
Number one is the Dunwich Horror. I think that's really got everything. The rural backwater decadence that you find also in the picture in the house, for instance. But the ancient secrets from ancient books, and how this modern scholar knows enough to take it seriously from after a look at Wilbur Whately. I just love the whole thing. And I guess The Shadow over Innsmouth is somewhat similar, and I like that a lot. In terms of shorter ones, oh boy. Well, I guess it's the main ones, like the Call of Cthulhu I love, but my absolute favorite is the Dunwich Horror.
Yeah. It's great stories. What about other weird tales, weird fiction authors? Do you have any particular favorites and any favorite stories?
Clark Ashton Smith, of course, is great. And one favorite of mine is The Schizoid Creator, where it turns out that God on his days off is the devil. That is so fascinating. And there's a couple other ones. Return of the Sorcerer is great, though they sure ruined it on Night Gallery. But he's just so great. I've read Smith, but I gotta reread him, because every time I do, I realize I've forgotten how great he is. Oh, yeah. Let's see, Tom Ligotti, I think, is absolutely great. He's really a modern Gnostic, and it just transports the reader into an alternate dimension. In fact, I've done a couple of church sermons based on his stories. There's real spiritual material there. One was, oh boy, I can't remember the title, but Laird Barron. The stories in his first couple of collections, I think, are just unique and amazing. And also Cody Goodfellow in his two-parter Radiant Dawn and Ravenous Dusk. Amazing how talented this guy is. And there are obviously plenty of others, but I guess those are my favorites probably.
Yeah, sounds good. Any more modern authors? I mean, in addition to guys we've talked about, I know I've really enjoyed the work of Richard Matheson. You know, a lot of, I'm a Gen Xer, and a lot of us grew up with a lot of his teleplays and that sort of thing, Twilight Zone and all the movies he did with Dan Curtis and others. So I've enjoyed him and some others. Do you have any more modern authors then, or you enjoy?
I like Charles Beaumont. And like I love The Howling Man and On the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
And anything I've read by him, I like a lot. Stephen King, I guess that's almost trite to say. He's so popular, but very gifted. Though I've not read anything of his since I gave up on it decades ago, just because it was so huge and I didn't have the time. But I've really enjoyed a lot of what he wrote. Salem's Lot, especially.
Yeah.
And let's see. Ramsey Campbell is amazingly talented, and
have you ever read Robert McCammon? Any of his stuff?
I've read, the only one I've read is Bale, which I enjoyed.
Okay. Swan Song is one I would recommend to you then, because that's sort of his version of The Stand, but it's in my opinion, it's better. It's a lot better, and a lot of people who've read both books say that thing.
Oh, I'll have to read it. Wow.
Yeah,
I love apocalyptic stuff.
Yeah, it's a brick. You know, it's like 900 pages, but it really moves and engages you. So it's but yeah, definitely one to check out. When does do you have a release date yet on that series that you were involved with?
Well, the first one is out already, Azathoth and Other Horrors, and that's available on Amazon. Shortly, there'll be a sort of a companion volume called the Tales of the Derleth Mythos, where it's not the stuff by him, but stories by others utilizing his creations, and that'll be out pretty soon. Then I'm hoping The Madness Out of Time will follow pretty soon, the second all Lovecraft thing, but it's going to take a while because it's just a cottage industry here. My wife and I started Exum Priory, and we did one of the books from it is the Exum Cycle, where we have various stories leading up to The Rats in the Walls, and then a couple of sequels to it. And and then there'll be Flashing Swords #9 coming out pretty soon, with different sword and sorcery, new stories of Thongor, Elac of Atlantis, Duar the Accursed, and Kothar, and some of these other well-known barbarians.
One thing that did occur to me I wanted to ask you about, especially since you're so much more heavily into this than I've gotten, and knowing Joshi and people like that personally, do you know anything about Lovecraft's writing style? I mean, did he kind of sit down and breeze through a story? Did he plan his stories? Do you know? Did he do a lot of heavy revision on them? What was his process like?
Well, he would set up and advise others to set up a chronology of the events that would happen, and then of course you reshuffle them as people find out things later and all that. He would do more than one draft, like we have some pages of a discarded draft of The Shadow over Innsmouth that's reasonably different. Like the case of Charles Dexter Ward, I think, is simply a draft. He never even typed it up and didn't submit it for publication. I think one of his friends did. But he was real particular about word choices, and in his manuscripts you can see how he decided, let me change that to this. And he was very meticulous to the point where he would tell Farnsworth Wright and the others, don't publish this if you feel the need to change even punctuation. It's got to be just like I wrote it exactly. And generally that's what happened. And he kept the English spelling of everything, and a bit of a nut, but but he was very meticulous. I don't know how long it took him, but it does seem to me that there are some where we know he wrote it over several months, but I don't happen to know from his letters or anything if how steadily he worked on any particular one. I get the impression he wrote pretty fast once he had thought it out.
Yeah.
But
I would imagine once he got done with his voluminous correspondence, I'm surprised he ever had time to write anything except letters.
Yeah, boy. If only he could go back in time and say, Howard, no, less letters, more stories. Probably wouldn't have listened anyway.
I know Clark Ashton Smith was very particular. He actually complains to Lovecraft in a letter I read once where he was talking about Farnsworth Wright, and he said, if I didn't have parents to support, he said, and he sent me something back saying, you need to change this and this to appease the common man or whatever. He says, I'd tell him to go chase himself. He says, he wished he had the money to set up his own publication where writers could submit their stories and their true vision.
Oh, yeah. So, and then he was offered the editorship at one point, but he didn't want to move to Chicago.
Yeah.
What would that have been like?
Oh, yeah, that would be interesting. Of course, he outlived, Howard and Lovecraft by a number of years, so lost both of his good friends there. Smith did, right.
Yeah, it was, yeah, in the 60s, I think he died.
Yeah, sometime in the 60s. And I guess at least initially with his poetry, he was a little bit more famous than either two of them. And then, he's today very obscure, as compared to them. And maybe that's because they created identifiable characters. I mean, Smith had some characters. He had some places like Aberloin that he created in his writings. But Cthulhu and Necronomicon and Conan and that sort of thing have just stayed with people over the years and kept them alive, whereas Smith's kind of receded into the mist there.
Yeah, it's amazing. Lovecraft would have been utterly astounded to see that there are plush Cthulhu dolls and the Necronomicons with faces on the cover in movies, and he would have been. He said he didn't want any of his stories made into movies because he knew they'd get slaughtered. And of course they did, though I have a guilty love for some of them. But he would certainly, if you'd have told him, I have this vision, here's what's going to happen, get out of here, you're crazy. And he would have viewed it as a strike against him that there were legions of people that he would become so popular. Oh no, they prefer to be up there, an acquired taste.
Yeah. Rob, I don't want to keep you too much longer. I appreciate you coming on and talking about this. It's been a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
Anytime you can talk to people about this kind of stuff and they get it and they don't look at you like, you're not somebody I turn my back on, then that's a good day. So.
Yeah.
Do you have any other projects coming out, anything related to any of this stuff or anything you want to share with anybody? I mean, I'll put a link to where your fiction is located on your website and that sort of thing so people can check that out, your Mythos stuff. Anything else you want to mention that people might be interested in?
Well, I wouldn't assume they'd be interested in my theological and biblical type stuff, though I've also written about 30 books in that area, but I'd imagine that's probably not of interest to our fellow sectarians here. Gee, I can't think of anything offhand.
Okay. And the Lovecraft Geek podcast, I guess that's kind of on hold and for lack of new questions and that sort of thing
That's
coming
exactly right. Yeah. I guess I shot my wad on that one.
Okay. All right. That sounds great. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Bob. I appreciate
yes.
you coming on. And definitely I will, like I said, I'll include those links so people can check your stuff out. And yeah, feel free to, to shoot me anything you think would be of interest.
I shall indeed right now. In fact, I'll dredge them up.
All right. That sounds great. Well, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. Great fun.